started and learn about pottery? You're supposed to say yay! Okay, we're going to liven up now because this is going to be a fun day. I want to welcome all of you here. And before we get started, my son Barry and Jenny, this is their nice place that I talked them into me having an event. And it's real fun. I have the fun story to tell because when we started planning this and getting together all the information, Jenny didn't know she had a potter in her family history. And D.E. Summerford is her great uncle. And so that was really neat. And we got some pictures out of your book, Sherry, and I put them in there so she knows what he looked like. Can everybody hear me? You can hear me good. Okay, back there. Can y'all hear Sue? Can y'all hear good? You can hear good? Okay, because I want everybody to be able to hear. We got a lot of information, and we're so thankful to have Joey and Sherry here, two pottery experts in my book. Okay, Barry and Jeannie.
We just wanted to thank y'all for coming out today, and we hope y'all enjoyed the program. Barbara has put in a lot of work, and we're just thankful for her knowledge of history and everyone that's out here today to speak and their knowledge and getting to share with us. Thank y'all for coming.
When Jeannie opened her store, one of the things we talked about wanting to do was maybe once a month or quarterly or something like that, to do something like this, to have something that folks are interested in, have you come out just where we hang out and do that. So this is our first one, so we're excited about that. And if you have an idea of something you'd like to do, holler at us or holler at Mom, and we'll be glad to do it. I know we're here about Pine Spring Pottery. I'm going to take 2 minutes to do something real quick. I love pottery, and this is one of my favorite pieces because of the story behind it. It was made in French Creek, Alaska. It says canned salmon is on it, but I'm going to give you the story behind it real quick. When we were living in San Antonio, Casey got sick. He'd been sick for a week. He finally got where he could eat. And I asked him, what do you want for me to cook for you? He said, fried salmon patties. So Mother had always made them for us as kids. We loved them. Oh, we loved them. So I went to the store, bought a can of salmon, came home, opened it up, had bones all in the salmon. I'm like, my goodness. I throwed it in the garbage. I went back to the store, bought the other. They had 2 brands of salmon. I bought the other brand, came home, opened it. It was full of bones. So I called Mother from San Antonio. I said, how do you make salmon patties? She said, well, you just get it, pat it up, you fry it. I said, but it's got bones in it. She said, yeah, I picked the bones out. I said, what? And so then I realized how much she loved us. I mean, it stinks. I got it when you're young. I didn't know that. I'd always had that patty. It stinks in the bone, get your hand. But I told Jeannie and the kids, I said, Gran really loves us to do that. All years I didn't realize that. And I got to thinking today as we was getting here and getting this thing ready, we're sitting here now, we're fixing to get these folks to speak, they're fixing to teach us, we're fixing to learn, we're fixing to see how excited it was. There was a lot of bones behind this that she picked out, that she did to get this ready. A lot of planning, a lot of things she does. That's what she does. I see her put on a lot of stuff, but for all that she's done.
Because I cry a lot. Okay, well, Sherry Bennett from Tremont is going to be our first speaker. And Sherry, I don't know when we got to know each other.
I don't remember.
I don't either, but anyway, Sherry's just full of information. And so Sherry's going to come now and start everything off.
Good deal. Okay, well, I'm glad that Miss Barb organized this day so that we can all share information about the potteries that used to be here, maybe from the 1840s to the 1950s, somewhere in that time period. Maybe we can learn some new information today, too. Of course, I had to give y'all a handout because I'm forgetful, and so I wanted to do that. So first of all, I'm going to read y'all a quote, and this is from Joey Brackner, and he's the most knowledgeable person I know about, can y'all hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. He's the most knowledgeable person I know about Alabama pottery, and we're going to introduce him later, and he's going to talk. I want to give you this quote about Marion and Lamar counties from his book. It says, Marion and Lamar counties were the center of historic pottery activity in northwest Alabama. The area around the towns of Detroit, Pine Springs, and Bedford were all significant jug towns. And the first documented potters here, I think were about the 1840s, weren't they? But there were probably some earlier than that. And my area of expertise is the Mississippi potters, the Etowah County Mississippi potters. But some of them were here earlier, the Dorseys and the Loyds and the Pitchfords. And so I'm gonna talk to you about those. I'm kind of the warm-up act. I'm gonna tell you about those, and then we're just gonna turn it over to Joey. But like I said, I gave you a handout there, and we listed all the potters. This is that big handout that says Marion and Lamar counties. I don't know if I even need that. I can talk pretty loud. So if you want to look at this handout along with me, I'm just going to kind of go over our potters. And the first page here, I'm going to give you a few highlights about Marion and Lamar County potteries. Okay, the potters here predominantly use the salt glaze on their ware, with the exception of the Rye family who used alkaline glaze. Okay, and most other Alabama potteries generally use the alkaline glaze. What is salt glaze? Well, I brought y'all a couple of shards to pass around. Salt glaze, it has kind of an orange peel texture. It's kind of rough. And what they do is when the kiln gets really hot, like about 2,400 degrees, they throw salt in there and it melts with the surface of the pottery, and that's called salt glaze pottery. And it's supposed to be, y'all will just pass this around. It's supposed to be very impermeable. I think more so than the other glazes, and that way it would hold like whatever you're trying to store in there, you know, whether it be water, liquor, or whatever you're storing in there. Okay, so that's salt glaze. Okay, so there were at least 10 established potters in Pine Springs by 1850, so that tells us that it was already here at least in the 1840s. I think a few of them are documented in the 1840s. It was probably here earlier than that because Marion County was created in 1818 from land acquired from the Chickasaw Indians on the Treaty of 1816. And Lamar County was created from the southern part of Marion County in 1867. So you had some early potters here. And most of the potters that were here in this area converged from like Habersham County, Georgia. You got several from there. And they were generally the alkaline glazing potters. But some of them, when they came here, they became salt glazing potters, okay? Because they worked with the potters from Tennessee. The other potters came from Tennessee to here. And they were generally salt glazing potters. So it seems like the Georgia potters that came here adapted to the salt glazing while they were here. All right. So I'm just going to go through these pages and tell you about just our potters from Etowah County that were here first, okay? So on page 2 there, if you turn the page, we got Basil Dorsey. Down at the bottom of the page, Basil Dorsey. And on the next page would be William Payne Loyd. And those two were our first documented potters in Etowah County in 1860. But they were here in the early, they were here basically in the late 1840s. And William Payne Loyd had already gone to Winston County, Mississippi by 1850. But he was here in the 1840s, okay? Basil Dorsey was documented as a potter here in the census in 1850, okay? Now, Basil Dorsey was married to Nancy Pitchford, and she was a sister of another potter here, John Bowen Pitchford, and he came here in the late 1850s, I think, to the best of my knowledge. Basil Dorsey didn't stay here long, a few years, and then he moved on to Etowah County, and he had like 5 sons, and we kind of wonder why he moved on to Etowah County, but there were so many potters here, I don't know if it was competition was fierce, I'm not sure. Also, they lost a 10-year-old son while they lived here. He died of typhoid fever, so, maybe they moved on because this place had some bad memories for him. I'm not sure about that. All right, so that was Basil Dorsey and William Payne Loyd. And William Payne Loyd had 5 brothers, and they were all potters here. And he was probably a potter here too, but he just moved on to Winston County, okay? But Stephen Carroll Loyd was one of his brothers, and he was documented as a potter here in 1850. He's not buried in Pine Springs Cemetery. I forget, do you remember what cemetery he's buried in? Joey knows. Ballard Cemetery. Okay, he's buried in Ballard Cemetery. The mother of all these Loyd potters was Charity Loyd, and she's buried in Pine Springs Cemetery, just right down the road, right down that way. And she has a Loyd pottery tombstone. The Loyds were famous for making their tombstones. Okay, they patented those tombstones in 1879, and if you go to the Pine Springs Cemetery, you can see what those what those tombstones look like. Okay, so it's listed his other brothers here. I'm not gonna go over all of them. Turn this up just a little bit, maybe. Y'all hear me a little better through the mic? Okay. So I'm not gonna go over all these other brothers, but Mac Wilson Loyd was one of the brothers that, he married John Bowen Pitchford's daughter, and we think that he was the one that, you know, helped the Dorseys and the Lloyds to change from, well, the Lloyds were already, the salt glazing potters, but the Dorseys were not, and the Pitchfords were not, because they were from Georgia. They were alkaline glazing potters. So we think when they married into the Lloyds, that's when they started making salt glazed pottery. And we do know for sure that Basil Dorsey and William Payne Lloyd made salt glazing pottery in Sulligent County because we have found their scrap piles. So they were definitely salt glazing potters. And in fact, let me just go ahead and pass around these. I have some pottery pipes, tobacco pipes, that we found at the site of the Lloyd. The Lloyds and the Dorseys owned the same land. The Lloyds owned it after the Dorseys in Sulligent County. Okay, and we have found tobacco pipes made from salt glazed pottery. And I'm gonna pass that around and let y'all look at it. One of the pipes has the initials TL on it, and we think that was William Payne Lloyd's wife, Thursa Lloyd, because she was the only one in the family that had the initials TL. So we think she was making these tobacco pipes in a mold. They're made in a mold. They have a seam down the middle of them. And we think she was making these tobacco pipes while maybe her husband was making pottery on the wheel. Okay. I don't know. Maybe she was in the house making dinner all day. Who really knows who made this? But it has the initials TL on it. So I'm gonna pass this around and let y'all look at it. Hard to find after the Civil War, and we know the Dorseys and Lloyds owned the land in Sulligent County in the late 1850s and the 1860s. So we think this was all made Civil War era. Okay. And again, William Payne Lloyd and Basil Dorsey that made the pipes were your potters here at Pine Springs. So we'll pass this around. The saddest, my book is the Jug Shop District of Sulligent County, and the saddest chapter in my book is about William S. Dorsey. He's Basil's son. He was a potter. William S. Dorsey and William S. Pitchford. He was John Bowen Pitchford's son. And again, they were over here, then they went to Sulligent County. They were first cousins, William S. Pitchford and William S. Dorsey. And they were young men in 1860. Again, they were listed as potters in our census in 1860, but they had to go to the Civil War. Both these potters died in the Civil War, and they were young. I think Pitchford was 26, and Dorsey was 33, and they both left young families. And it's just a very sad chapter in my book. William S. Pitchford is also buried in Pine Springs Cemetery. Pine Springs Cemetery got a lot of history over here. It really does. Okay, so that's the Dorseys and the Lloyds, and again, you can see a little more information. I tried to highlight a little bit of information about everybody here. All those Lloyds were potters over here. Okay, we move on to page 4, the next page. Well, also, yeah, I was hoping Billy Weeks would be here today, but he's not here, is he? Okay, also, about the Dorseys. There's a collector over here in Alabama, Billy Weeks. I don't know if any of y'all know him or not. But he has some original letters that William S. Dorsey and his family wrote back and forth to each other during the Civil War. Okay? And that's just so neat to, I've been trying to buy those letters from him for a while, but he said, well, find me something else about the Civil War. And I said, I'm going to tell you, I can't find anything about the Civil War. So if y'all got something good about the Civil War you want to sell, I might be interested in buying it so I can swap it for his letters. Because William S. Pitchford's pottery we hadn't located it yet, but it was right behind our house somewhere, within about half a mile. Okay, but anyway, in one of the letters that William S. Dorsey's daughter wrote to him while he was in the Civil War, this is what she said. She said, Pa, I want to see you very bad. You know you've been gone so long. Pa, don't fight if you can help it. I'm afraid you'll get killed. And, of course, he did die in the Civil War, but he did not die he didn't get killed, he didn't get shot, he died of some kind of disease, and we don't know what. He'd gone home and died, he was sick and died at home in 1863, I think. He's buried in Sulligent County, but William S. Pitchford is buried here in Pine Springs. Okay, go to the next page, page 5, and you're going to see James C. Jim Humphreys. Okay,
he was a potter here in 1895, and he came also from Habersham County, Georgia, and grew up, that was a big pottery center there in Habersham County, Georgia. And today, they have a multi-million-dollar pottery museum there. Joy, have you ever been to that? Is that not awesome? Do we not need one of those here? It is awesome. And again, Jim Humphreys grew up there, so he probably learned how to make pottery there. He was here in 1895, and he was a brother-in-law to Jimmy Rye, the Rye Potters of Detroit, close to Detroit. His brother-in-law to him. So he would go back and forth, from Mississippi to Alabama. He'd work over here some, go back over there, whatever. And he worked from about 1900 to 1935. He died in 1935 in Sulligent County. Mostly he worked over there later, but he was over here earlier. His son was Johnny C. Humphreys, and he worked over here. And his son was E.J. Humphreys, and I think he even worked over here at the Rye. They worked with the Rye Pottery. And there's reportedly, and this is the family that gave this information, that there's a jug that was made at the Rye shop in 1933 that had E.J.'s initials on it. Now, I don't know if the family still has that jug. They didn't make that clear. Or if it's wandering around somewhere over here in Marion or Lamar counties, I'm not sure. So if you find a jug that's got the initials E.J. or E.J. Humphreys on it, that'd be worth a lot of money. All righty. On that same page, about page 5, down at the bottom, if y'all want to mark these as Sulligent County Potters, you can. There's John Plunkett that lived over here in the 1860 census at Pikeville. Now, he's not listed as a potter. He's listed as a miller. But his grandson and his great-grandson, his grandson George W. Plunkett and his great-grandson John William Plunkett were potters in Sulligent County. They were, one of our earlier potters over there. So you wonder, where did they learn the trade? So was the John Plunkett that lived here, was he a miller and a potter? Because Joey and I were talking about this a little earlier. So many of those potters in the early years were only listed as farmers. Lifelong potters that I know in Sulligent County were never listed in the census as potters. They were listed as farmers. 2 reasons: because farming was probably, you had to farm to make a living back then. Okay, so it was probably their maybe main job, and they did their pottery on the side when the farming was not so, pressing, when their work at farming is not so pressing. And as Joey told me a while ago, it might have, depend on what they were listed in the census as the time of the year that the census taker went around. What were they doing at that time of year was probably what they told them they were. So that's a good point that Joey made this morning. Okay, also on page 5, the Davison family. Oh my word. Oh, if that's not a mixed up mess, I don't know. And and by the way, they're my ancestors, Davison family. Okay, so there was a geological survey over here, published in 1900, and I'm going to read you what it says at the bottom of page 5. It stated that Rye has a pottery 6 miles north of Millville. It has a Detroit post office. And it said Davison Brothers have one also in the same neighborhood. Well, who and what? What Davisons? I think y'all may have all heard of a James A. Davison that lived over here, or maybe y'all are familiar with Davison families that still live over here. Okay, well, that James A. Davison was the patriarch of that family. His brother was Andrew Davison that lived in Sulligent County, Mississippi. Andrew Davison had a son that was one of our main potters, Ellie Davison. Ellie Davison, all this on page 6. Well, I didn't mention Ellie, but Ellie had 4 sons: James Davison, James, Jefferson, William, and Andrew J., who were all potters in Sulligent County about in the 1880s and 1890s, and went on to about 20, I forget. I got too much information going on in my head. But anyway, so they had first cousins over here, big time. So who were the Davison potters over here? Was it the James A. Davison family that were over here, and they had a store, I think, and all kinds of stuff? They were pretty prominent citizens. Was it them? Or was it our Sulligent County potters that were over here? And I don't have a record of them being over here as far as living over here. But, it's just right across the line, so they could have had pottery over here. I'm not sure. Also, I interviewed Mr. Cecil Rye, and he was telling me about maybe a later Davison pottery over here, about circa the 1930s, because he told me that when he was a boy, which would have been in the 1930s, he remembered he and his father coming down the road
Basil Dorsey and them lived right down this way.
Oh, you have to show me that later. I gotta see that. Anyway, so they lived here at Pine Springs. Basil Dorsey, his next-door neighbor was Thomas R. Noe. Okay. In going in Ancestry and researching these folks, again, this was very interesting to me. I found out that later in 1867, Thomas R. Noe and his wife were murdered by an axe murderer, by a vagrant that they had let him spend the night in their barn. In the middle of the night, he came in the house and murdered them with an axe. And they were both buried in Pine Springs Cemetery. So I know that's off on the rabbit trail, but that was just kind of interesting to me. So they're in Pine Springs Cemetery. Okay, and then I just gave you a photo of Jim Humphreys there on that page. And that's a little article that was in the newspaper 1895, says that Jim Humphreys of Pine Springs was in town, was in Hamilton last week taking orders for jugware. All right, on the next page is E.P. Kennedy's family in Etiwamba County. That's my husband's great-grandfather. On the left, and that's his pottery here right by, that's his pottery over here. And then we have a picture that we think is Basil Dorsey, but we're not sure, but all the Dorsey families on Ancestry have that listed as Basil Dorsey. So let me give you two more little pieces of information here, and then we're gonna turn it over to Joey in just a minute. Hold on. All right, I gave y'all two more handouts, and these handouts are about a couple of jugs that were actually made in Etowah County, okay? But they ended up over here 100 years later, and there's interesting story on both of them. So I just gave you these handouts so you'll have that info, and you could help us with some info on the Sears jug. But let me give you this other one first. This jug is made by J.C. Humphreys and W.D. Suggs about 1900, and it has Bexar address on it, but it would have been made on the State Line Road in Etowah County. But the deal is, last year, my kinds of Winfield Antiques found it at an estate. Well, no, he didn't buy it from an estate sale. He bought it from an estate and took it to his store, and he was taking bids on it, from different folks. So Arlen and Weta Cox from our area really wanted that jug because it's from our area and our potters. Okay, so on December the 29th last year, tornado hit Winfield, right? So Mr. Arlen and I were on the phone. We're like, I hope that jug's all right, And of course we knew my kinds too. We worried about him too, but we was definitely worried about that jug too. So we found out. I was on Facebook and found out next day or two that my kinds was having a sale and selling stuff because his store had been damaged in that tornado. So I called Mr. Arlen. I said, you better get over there and check on Mr. Mike and check on that jug. I said, because he's selling some stuff. His store got hit. So we was both like, well, that jug's gone. There's no way. So it had completely demolished the office where the jug was stored and blew the jug out into the yard now. And miracle of miracles, it did not get one scratch. So when Mr. Arlen got over here and checked on Mr. Mike, and then he asked him, just make me a price on that jug. So Mr. Mike did, and so Mr. Arlen got the jug, and now it's back in Etowah County where it belongs. So that's the story on that jug. I just thought that'd be interesting too. You got one more little handout here, the Sears jug, what we call the Sears jug. Okay. And this one, we're hoping y'all can help solve some of this mystery. This Sears jug was actually made, it's got a Sears order scratched on it. It's called Sgraffiti. Is that how you pronounce that, Joe? Sgraffito. If you scratch anything into the glaze of a jug, when it's like what's called leather hard, before it gets hard, that's when they do it. Isn't that right? Don't I have that right? Yeah, before the firing, but it's got to already be glazed, right? But it's still just leather hard. And you can scratch whatever you want to in there. And they scratched a Sears order. And it's dated August of 1917. And it's got a Smithville address. But Smithville went all the way up to Hopewell in Etowah County. And E.P. Kennedy, my husband's great-grandfather, was in Hopewell. And we believe this jug is associated with him because also, over 100 years later, this jug was found over here right between Detroit and Hamilton and somewhere, Hewitt. Found in the corn, dug out of a corn crib over here. Randy Rice sold it at his auction. And again, Mr. Arlen Cox acquired that jug, and it came back to Etowah County. But we're not really sure who made that jug. We know it was made in Etowah County. We know it was made in 1917. We can't say for sure how it got over here or who made it. But again, it was found over here 100 years later. So if y'all know anybody that knows any information on that jug, please let Miss Barb know so she can contact me, because we'd really like to know who made that, but we don't know. But we do suspect that it had to do with Mr. E.P. Kennedy, because he moved over and made pottery, and it was found not too far from where he had his shop. Okay, well, that's all I've got, and so now I'm going to turn it over to Joey Brackner, but I'm going to read you his little biography. He has so many accomplishments, I can't remember them all, so I'm just going to read this, okay? And then we're going to let him talk. Joey Brackner served as Alabama State folklorist from 1985 to 2021. He is the co-producer of Unbroken Tradition, a documentary about Jerry Brown, and he's the author of the book Alabama Folk Pottery. And that's where I got all this information, by the way, about you, the Lamar and Marion County potters. And from him, he knows that I got that from his chapter. Because we talked last week, and I told him, I said, well, I'm just going to type up all the names, so y'all have that. So, I copied, but he knows it. He's the author of the book, Alabama Folk Pottery. Y'all really need that book, too. He served as a host of the Alabama public television series Journey Proud since 2013. His new book of Mules and Mud, the story of Alabama folk potter Jerry Brown, was published in 2022, and it was written in collaboration with his longtime friend Jerry Brown. So now we're going to let Mr. Joey talk, and I'm sure he's going to tell you more about his new book also. Thank y'all.
What you can say about pottery in this area. Before I start, I'm going to grab something to grab. And I'm glad that the last thing that Sherry said is so right. Jerry wrote most of this book with his words, and I fitted them in with kind of a beginning and an end, and the middle part is Jerry's words. And Sandra remembers when Eileen and I came up and spent about 3 days, and we interviewed. Jerry and I have been talking about doing a book about his life because he had a very interesting life. And like a lot of Southern potters, pottery making is from both sides of his family. Why is that the case? Well, pottery, it is right. Everybody farmed. A lot of people farm, when you may have a business in town. You do some kind of farming. Back then, you really did some kind of farming. And everybody farmed. But if you knew how to make pottery, that was a craft. That was a skill. And, if times were hard or whatever, if you were a young man, and back in the old days, it was only men. That changed in the 20th century. You might take off down the road. You have the skill to make pottery. You get a job, usually to the west of where you've lived. You're single, and you marry your boss's daughter. That happened again and again and again, from the early 1800s until into the 20th century. And so that's why so many potters have pottery making on both sides of their family. And Jerry, the Stewarts of Louisville, Mississippi, had come from Perry County, Alabama before. But Jerry's father, Wanda's father, came and married Hetty Mae. And she actually helped me with my big pottery book. This is from that book. And this is kind of that map. I brought this because of this map, because this map shows the distribution of pottery making communities in this part of Alabama. And I listed a few little places in Mississippi because a lot of the potters ended up moving west into Mississippi. And also potters in Alabama sold pottery in Mississippi. Peter Cribbs's will, the stores in Columbus, Mississippi owed his estate because they had pottery, on consignment from his family when he died right before the Civil War. So anyway, it's a fascinating story, and there were some really early potters, and the only reason that we're not going to dwell on it is because they didn't spend a lot of time there. But I want to mention them. Joseph Royal Tanner, who is, I think, we're not sure. He was not from the Deep South. Maybe Maryland, maybe another mid-Atlantic state. He came through early, and he was in Franklin County. We know this from a lawsuit after he got to Texas. But he established a pottery in Monroe County, Mississippi. Didn't stay there a big long time. Ended up selling it to Peter Cribbs. And Cribbs didn't stay there either. He ended up coming to Bedford in the southern part of this county to make pottery. But I mention them because Tanner, Joseph Royal Tanner, was one of the first potters in the Republic of Texas. The other, even earlier potter, is one of Wanda's distant cousins, Taylor Brown, who was from Georgia, came to Talladega County, Alabama, Jefferson County, Alabama, and all the way to Rusk County, Texas. And all of this was before Texas became a state. So people were always looking for the greener pastures. So I'm not going to say too much more about, I think you did a great job of talking about the potters here and the historical context of the potters here. I will say this, though. Y'all are talking about having events. Jerry Otts really wants to have, maybe not annually, but every so often, a gathering celebrating the pottery of this area. And maybe not just Lamar County, maybe Marion, Franklin, you know, we can include some Mississippi counties. And so I think that's a great idea because it's been done in other places. It's done in several places in Georgia every year, but it's been done on Sand Mountain, Alabama, by local collectors and descendants of potters. It's been done in Randolph County, Alabama. And I just think it'd be a great idea. So I don't, whether it's done here or under the auspices of the historical group here, Jerry wants to talk, so he couldn't be here today. But anyway, yeah, the book about Jerry I thought was important to write because Jerry's father was an older than average father. I'm an older than average father. So my son has a different perspective than most of his. You know, most of my son's friends' dads are a good 15 to 20 years younger than me. And so Jerry's dad, y'all's dad, learned how to make pottery in the late 1800s as a kid. And when Jerry got back to making pottery, after that period of time logging, that's kind of the way he made it. I mean, Basil Dorsey could have walked in the 1980s into Jerry's shop. He would have been really amazed by the electricity, but he could have identified everything in that shop. Jerry and Sandra were still firing with wood. That's why we wanted to make that film. He was using a mule-drawn mud mill, and you know, none of the Georgia potters were doing that anymore. I think Burl Craig in North Carolina used a mule for a while, and of course Jerry had used a mule not only as a kid in mixing up the clay that they dug out of the ground, but he later used it in logging to snake the logs out of the woods because it's hilly around here, and you can't get a truck in everywhere. So he had those skills, and as it turned out, you know, using a mule and being vertically integrated, going from the clay in the ground all the way to sales, which hardly any business can do these days, unless you're a craftsperson, was a great marketing point. And so people really wanted that. And to add onto that, Jerry's family is probably the Southern pottery making family, the Browns, most known for the face jug. And the face jug is a Southern form. People like to argue about why the face jug. But you know, face jugs were made in West Africa, face jugs were made in Europe, the American Indians made face jugs, deer jugs, frog jugs. You know, if you've got clay, you can make anything you want to, if you're skilled enough. And a gallon jug is about the size of a human head. And but more and more people think that it probably, the type of jug, the appearance of the kind of jugs that were made in the South, face jugs, probably did start out in South Carolina after a load of illegally imported slaves were caught. You know, you've heard this week about the Clotilda in Mobile. That was the last slave ship. It was illegal. They were smuggling. They broke the law. They were caught. But the one before that was caught was the Wanderer. And that was on the Georgia coast. And they were caught there too. And just like the Clotilda, a lot of those folks ended up being enslaved anyway. The people that did the smuggling were punished, but the people from Africa still, and a lot of those folks went to work in a pottery in South Carolina. And it was right after that you start seeing these face jugs pop up. And actually, those early face jugs tended not to be a full gallon, but a half gallon, which it actually is I think, proportionally, is a really good-looking size for a face jug. So anyway, that's a tangent. Sherry talked about the alkaline glaze. The alkaline glaze is green. It's made from either wood ashes or lime from limestone. And Sandra brought some of the pottery from their shop, and some of it, the green, is an alkaline glaze. So there's none up here. That's the only reason I mentioned. The brown pottery inside, I noticed some folks brought in some brown colored churns. That's the Albany slip. And that's a store-bought glaze. Why, if you could make a beautiful green glaze, would you want to buy a store-bought glaze that mined in New York in the 1890s to put on a pot that you make in Alabama? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is, as Jerry said, and I think I quoted him somewhere, alkaline glaze will take the skin off your hands. It's very basic, and it is rough. Today, we love it. We think it's beautiful. But you have to remember, by the end of the 1800s, Southern potters were competing against Northern pottery factories. It was like a Walmart effect. And all their stuff was this beautiful uniform brown or a beautiful uniform white. And people said, this old runny, drippy, kind of looks kind of nasty. It's just not uniform. I think I want this new stuff. So the potters here, because of market pressure, switched their glazes. So that's really why and the potters here, especially I think the Humphreys family, they love the white glaze. This is white splattered with cobalt blue. And the cobalt blue, the use of cobalt blue by potters began way back with salt glazed pottery, what Sherry was talking about. And if you'll, I don't think any of the pieces you brought have cobalt on them, but the tombstones that the Loyds made here and in Mississippi do have blue on them, cobalt blue, and it's really pretty. And the Humphreys kind of really loved cobalt. In fact, there was a tombstone that probably was made by the Humphreys around 04, 03, 04, the Cash children who died in infancy. And it got busted up, broke up, and a descendant, it was about 2/3 of it. I would go by every year and photograph it, and it would get smaller and smaller every 5 or 6 years because the lawnmower is sling rocks. And that's not good for pottery tombstones, and that's why we've lost a lot of them. And this one, unlike the Loyds, which is a tablet sitting on top of a cylindrical base that they patented, it's in the U.S. Patent Office. And they sold that patent, they leased that patent to other Southern potters. It was just a round barrel type thing, which is what most potters in the South just made a round thing, and then they either decorated it, put a name on it, they didn't. You can find a lot of those with no names whatsoever, but they're pretty. This one had the names written in cobalt, but a descendant of the Loyd. Do you know Mary Villadson? That's somebody you need to meet. So she's a genealogist. She worked at the Birmingham Museum. She is a descendant. She ended up giving that piece to the Birmingham Museum. They own it. I'm not sure if it's on display right now. There's a photograph. Sherry has photographs of it. There's a photograph in my big book. But anyway, that was done here. This was really an important little area because, one, the Loyds made the salt glaze because they came from Tennessee. Just about everybody on the other side of the Tennessee River used that glaze instead of the more southern alkaline glaze. And so the glaze that Jerry used was actually another draw in marketing. It's a glaze that Brown Pottery still uses. And it's very collectible, and it's uniquely southern. And we can get into that. But I think probably our speaking time has probably gone over time. So maybe right now, I could just maybe open it up for questions for both me and Sherry. Would that be okay, Barb?
That'd be great.
Okay, so does anyone have anything you want to ask? Oh, and let me say this. Some of you are related to potters. Sherry and I, Jerry Otts, whoever, would really love for y'all to share genealogical information with us, scans of historic photos with us, that kind of thing. Because that's how we learn. Working class folks don't leave a huge historical record. Not like a governor or a general. And so, it's talking to descendants of potters and relatives of potters is where we get all that stuff that we can't find in the historical record. It's like when I talked to Wanda's mother about E.P. Kennedy. I said, what can you tell me about Ephraim Kennedy? And she said, you mean Eth? Everybody called him Eth, which is, I'd never heard that. And then I went to visit Leon, and he had photographs, some of which you also used, and I used one in the book. That's how we learn. But I should probably, before I stop, say something about women in pottery shops. Wanda can make pottery, Sandra can make pottery. But if they had been born in the 1830s or 40s, chances are their involvement in a pottery shop would not be as much as it ended up being because they were born much later. Why is that? Can anyone tell me? I've only had one audience get this correct.
The women were too busy raising children.
I've got a second.
Cleaning, washing.
That's exactly right. I gave a talk on Alabama pottery to the Alabama chapter of the Homemakers of America. And the first person that answered that question was right. The healthcare system, how many kids, responsible for food, the kitchen garden, telling the kids what to do as far as the house and yard goes, full-time job. Full-time job. And, helping some with marketing, crops, and pottery. But making something like these smoking pipes would be something they could have done because they bought those molds from northern mold-making companies. There were a couple of them. And so several pottery-making families in the South could make those. You could just form them with your hands almost. And those molds have passed down in certain families. Very good. And you had your hand up for a question.
I do. Did most potters initial or hallmark in some way their work, or did they have something about what they did that was so distinctive that we can identify and go, oh yeah, that pot was done by so-and-so because of?
Do you want to start that answer, or do you want me to start it?
Go ahead.
Okay. Some did and some didn't. And, my theory is that if you were close to another pottery, and I'm talking way back, 20th century, yeah, you for the most part they did. And it was easy to do. You could have a cobalt stamp made, and that was real easy. It wouldn't take a whole lot of time. Jerry and Sandra sign on the bottom. That didn't start really until the 20th century. Potters signing on the bottom. Typically, that's a much more recent piece. In fact, Jerry didn't sign anything on the bottom when he first started back because his dad didn't. But then he realized this is a marketing tool, and so people look for that. And Jerry even dated, and y'all still do that, don't you, Sandra? So, but what Sherry and I have to do, because so many people didn't, if they were in a remote area, like for example, I don't think the Loyds probably had a mark here or a stamp. I haven't seen one, but I have seen some initials, thank God, and also you go to the site where it was made, because they lost a lot in breakage during firing, because a traditional potter didn't do a bisque firing. The artists here know what a bisque firing is. You fire it, you make a piece on the wheel, then you fire it, and it contracts a little bit. Then you glaze it, and then you fire it again. Well, it was a one, and Sandra and them still don't do a bisque firing. Traditional Southern potters do a one-step firing. They lose a lot, they break a lot, but they save a whole lot of labor doing it that way. But lucky for us, when we find a shop, there's a pile of busted pottery, and we can look and say, oh, this is what their rims look like. This is what their handles look like. This is what their glaze formula look like. And then we might find a few pieces that have some scribble. And then sometimes we'll find a stamp and say, well, one day we'll find a whole piece of pottery it'll have this stamp on it, but we haven't yet. But at least we know where it was made. So it's a part of what makes this so much fun. It's kind of like genealogy. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle. And it's so much fun when you find something, oh, that's where that piece fits. That makes sense. And it's a thrill. It really is. And you, no.
Well, I just want to say, also, a lot of this would be lost if we could not find the refuse sites, you know, where they threw their scrap pile, in other words. And a lot of it almost is lost in Edwina County. You know, it's like within one generation of being lost, like where the Loyd and the Dorseys made pottery. We didn't know where they made pottery. We knew where they owned land, but they usually owned 160 acres, a quarter section back then. So, you know, where are you gonna look on 160 acres? Well, let me tell you how we found where the Loyds and the Dorseys made pottery, because Mike's cousin, my husband's 63, his cousin's a little bit older, and his cousin remembered that there was a place called the Old Kiln, way up in the woods where all the local hunters hunt, okay? And, so he told Mike, said, it's up there by the willy fields. Well, Mike, my husband, because he's 63, he remembered where the willy fields were, because he hunted up in that area too. But the willy fields are now in pine trees. So nobody else would have known where the willy fields were, except this generation. Okay, so we went to the willy fields and we found the old kiln. But, you know, if this had been 50 years from now, it would have been hard to find, because Weyerhaeuser had gone through and cut all the trees and all that. And the pottery scrap pile was in about 5 different piles down the hill, you know, and under the leaves and all that. It wasn't really noticeable. So a lot of these old pottery scrap piles are on the verge of, their location is on the verge of being lost. Yeah. So that's another point. Oh, and one more point. The hunters are invaluable in finding. I've had a hunter come up to me in the middle of a women's boutique store in Tupelo. He said, are you Sherry Bennett? You're the one that does pottery. We got to talking. He rented some land down in our area. I said, have you ever seen a pottery scrap pile over there? Oh, yeah, I have. No. And that's how we found another one. You know, hunters have been invaluable in helping us find the pottery scrap pile. So,
Wanda and Sandra can tell you. And a potter, an experienced potter, can grab it in his or her hands and know the difference. Part of it has to be with kaolin content. It has to have a little sand in it. Sometimes potters would mix clays together or put sand, in pottery. So yeah, that's exactly right. And so, but they also wagoned and shipped it off to places that didn't have good pottery clay. People still needed churns, chamber pots, and all kind of pitchers and jugs. Missy.
I just want to say,
And Barb wants me to take it down. Come up, Sandra. And then after Sandra, Wanda Summerford, who is Jerry's sister, will speak, and then Missy Miles will speak. So, Sandra, come on in here and just kind of speak close to the. You're not going to do anything to hurt this, so just get right up to it, because you have a soft voice. Okay, everybody, here's Sandra Brown.
Well, this was sprung on me at the last minute, so I've been sitting back there thinking. But me and Jerry and I worked in the pottery for 37 years together. And he passed away in March 4th, 2016. We had a lot of good times together in the pottery shop, making pottery. And he was an awesome potter. He has pottery at Smithsonian. He's got one permanent display there. And we had 3 children together. Oh, well, actually, we raised 3 children together. Jeff Brown and Jeff Wilburn and Tammy, which is Tammy Rawls now. And Jeff, his son, passed away 2 years later with a massive heart attack. And so it's just been, sort of like a roller coaster, but we cherish the moments we all had together. And Thank y'all. That's all I got to say. Was out there, Jerry was making pottery for us, and,
He talks about how he and Jack would ride double on the bicycle up and down this road.
that pushed me down in the hill one time. Have to write her own.
Here we go, Wanda. Come on up and get real close to the microphone. Let me hold this just a moment.
It's bittersweet to me, and brings a lot, good memories and bad. But Jerry's not the only one to make a face jug. This is mine. But it's my one and only though, because, I still work part-time, and I've got a pottery, but I just don't really spend a lot of time in it, which I should. But, Jerry tried to get me to come take classes when he got the grant to give them. And I had 3 young children and working, and, then the pottery didn't mean that much to me, because it was hard work. People think it's just fun, mud to play in, but it's hard work. And then, you didn't have the drying kilns, you had to take it in and out for the sun to dry it, and I was just a little bitty thing, pots for bees. Bees I was almost, and, if you chip one, you got hurry. You had to be real careful with it. And it's talking about the groundhog kill and burning and breaking the pottery. And Daddy was very impatient, and he never could wait to take the thing off the kiln. And, you could just hear Mama would fuss at him. She'd get so mad at him. But he had to open it, and see how it looked. And you could hear it ding, ding, ding. You could hear it cracking. And he would put Jack in the back, and Jerry would be, in front of the pit. And I would be on the plank over the coals, and that's how we got out. The coals were still hot.
How, yeah, I was about to
So,
say, how hot was it?
You just didn't fall in. But he had to get that pottery out. And you were talking about the clay. That was our Saturday morning ritual most of the time. Was get Daddy's old red truck and picks. And we go somewhere around, I think it was around Gatman or down that way, and dig that clay out of the bank. That's where we got our clay. We didn't have it hauled in. You didn't have the powder like you do now. But my dad was from Atlanta, Georgia, and I meant to bring his book. There's a Georgia pottery book too, and he's in that. And he came from Atlanta, and that's where he met my mom in Louisville. And they had my older brother Jack in Louisville, and he moved to Slunge to work for the Summerford Pottery. And he made some for subs and some of the others too. But I think they lived there about a year. And then they moved to Pan Springs, and that's where Jerry and they were born. So, and it was, you didn't get anything for pottery then. It was a hard way to live. But we made it, and I'm proud of Jerry, how he took it up. I didn't make it much growing up, so I do little stuff like this in little pots, but, that's about all I can do. But I mainly was hoping my grandkids could pick it up. But I've only got one, and that's her youngest daughter that's really got an interest in it, so. She's in pharmacy school now, so I'm hoping one day she'll, go down the road with it. But, it's bittersweet to me because, Jerry's gone and his only son is gone, Jeff. And Jeff can make pottery too. I have some of his. And he's got 4 grandkids left. So hopefully they're gonna pick it up and maybe have a booth in the festival next year. So, Jerry would be so too for that. But I'm very proud of Jerry. But, that's all I have. You got any questions? Or, that away, and we dug it somewhere out there. But he's right, a potter knows the clay. There's a certain feel to it. Can't have a lot of sand in it or anything.
He talks about how he and Jack would ride double on the bicycle up and down this road.
That pushed me down in the hill one time.
Because I would love to introduce Missy, one of my favorite Alabama artists.
I'm gonna go in here and grab some later.
muralist. She's a painter. She's painting today. She makes art with gourds. She's been really a mainstay of the Jerry Brown Arts Festival, really from the very beginning. In fact, I met Missy before there was Jerry Brown Arts Festival because she was friends with Jerry and Sandra. But you know, you can see her work in towns from here to Jasper on the walls of buildings. I don't know what she's going to talk about, but whatever it is, it'll be interesting. So, Missy Miles. Just adjust this, Missy, to
Okay.
how you want to do it.
How's everyone doing? Has this not been a wonderful, wonderful day? What a beautiful setting. I've done a lot of things in my life, but I've always had art. It taught me appreciation of art even when I wasn't able to make art. It takes all types for art to exist, and it's around us every single day, whether you take it in or not. The pavement beneath our feet, 50 foot in the air on top of the biggest building. There's some type of art, whether it's in architecture, landscaping, frogs, mules, and I love that. It adds quality of life. What I love about pottery is not only the utilitarian of it, the beauty of it, the skill it takes to do it, the strength it takes to pull the amount of clay for a 5-gallon churn. It's amazing. The fact that it's so fragile and it's so heavy. So when I had an option in life, I was installing insulation, and I didn't like that. So I wanted to do my own thing. So I was doing driftwood furniture. Then my husband gifted me gourds for Valentine's Day one year. Molded fruit, not just a few, a truckload. So I had no choice because there's no room to do woodworking. So I ended up becoming 3-time Alabama gourd queen. I have not found a person or an animal. Never been the queen of anything, but I'm the queen of gourds. But I love them. Some countries eat them. There's a lot of history of them. We could have another little rally on this and just gourds. Every state has a gourd society. I don't know if you knew that. And there's strong competition. You know, there's a lot of good gourders out there. But Jerry and I developed this friendship when I started doing the Jerry Brown Arts Festival. And he would make fun of me. You're just a gourd head and you sound like a Yankee. And he gave me a hard time about that all the time. And we would just banter back and forth, and I loved it. And I don't think he ever believed the fact I'm from Camden, Alabama. My father helped build Miller's Ferry Dam. He worked construction. We moved around a lot. And I did spend 10 years in Illinois, and I think that's where this dialect came from. But I'm kind of like a parrot. If I hang around with a lot of New Yorkers, I'll end up talking like a New Yorker, or I don't know. I want everybody to fit in, and I love Southern culture. I love the fact Dan Penn is known as saying this, and so is Jerry. You can't tell a Southern man what to do. You're gonna do what you want to do, and it's the South, and there's beauty in that. And we enjoy our lifestyle, and it's a culture that we cling to, that we love. I love gardening. Jerry was very competitive with his gourds and his martins. I would grow gourds for him, and if he grew some and they cross-pollinated and they were an ugly gourd, of course he wants to give them to me, because I didn't see them as ugly. And getting involved with the Northwest Alabama Arts Council, we did Molding Hands, Hearts, and Minds, and that would be at the studio. And it was 3rd and 4th graders within Marion County. Sometimes I think some other areas would come in. And I enjoyed helping them get suited in their little aprons and introducing Jerry, and he would just sit there and he'd be so proud, and I was like, y'all, he's a Smithsonian artist. 9th generation. Have you ever met a 9th generation anything, you know? That's amazing. I'm proud of Jeff. Jeff does wonderful turnings. A plein air event was in Hamilton a couple weeks ago, and I was gifted one of Jeff's little soup bowls. And I was astounded by the weight of it and the thickness. It's good, y'all. It's good. But I want to share this story. This happened with the Northwest Alabama Art Council. We had an adult day with Jerry. He goes, pick out something you want to make and I'll turn it with you. I've done a lot of different types of art. I only did pottery with Jerry when his hands touched my hands. I don't care to ever revisit it because of that memory. I couldn't do it. I could never get centered. It just didn't work for me. But if Jerry would touch it and he'd laugh at me and he'd banter back and forth the whole time we're turning. I told him I wanted to make a rooster. Are you familiar with his rooster pot or pitchers? And they have a handle and they're stout. I said, but I wanted to make it into a fish. And the whole time we're doing this, he goes, Missy, a rooster is not a fish. And a fish can never be a rooster. And he just couldn't believe it. And he goes, and what color are you going to do it? I go, red. He goes, no. But he understood I wanted the construction base and its 3 ads, and I didn't want the handle. And he goes, what the heck are you going to put in it? I said, I don't know. Doesn't matter. I just wanted to work with you to go back and forth about roosters, he said. And he laughed. And a very special piece of mine is a face jug that Jerry made to look like my father. He fell in love with one of my turtles. Stood about tall. It was one of the biggest turtles I did. Body of a big kettle gourd and gourd arms, and he's standing up like he's cheering. And Jerry liked it. He goes, go in there and pick out a face jug. And I look in there. I go, Jerry, I don't know any of those guys. Can you make one that looks like my dad? Sure, give me a picture. The picture I picked is one Dad did of a selfie before he had dentures doing a crazy face. And Jerry nailed it. And then Dad told me that when it comes his time, he wants to be cremated, and that's the jug he wants to be put in. So I think I will look at it differently when that happens. But anyway, Jerry was a good friend. Sandra's a good friend. I'll do anything for him. I appreciate what they do. And I appreciate y'all appreciating pottery and wanting to know the lineage, because it's important. And it's just a joy. The more you know, the more you're addicted to it. And Sherry comes over, and Arlen comes over, and even more addiction to it. And then no one can have the addiction like Arlen and Quitta have.
That's true.
I mean, I haven't even seen the basement. But it's an amazing collection, and I'm so grateful to know it exists. But that's all I have. Thanks, y'all. Okay. When I was told of the event, and I'm like on board, yeah, Joey's, Sherry's, and yeah, I'm going. And Barbara decides to like mention me as a highlighter, and I'm like, no, I'm just attended, man. And my husband and I, we collect pottery. I love all things. I want to enjoy life to the fullest. And so 14, 15 years ago, I started painting murals. And not everybody and their brother goes out and wants to paint murals. You're working in 90-degree days. You're breathing exhaust, weather, brick walls, prep work. There's a lot to it. Years of planning. A lot of municipalities are getting grants, so there's a lot of planning that's involved. Is it a big moneymaker? If you think about the whole scope of it, no, not really. But I like adding to the community and telling the community story. And a lot of the murals I do, I'm in someone else's head. What are they trying to tell me by asking questions? And I'm coming up with a composition about them, for them, from their feedback. And so really it's therapy for me because I'm out of my own head. I'm in someone else's head. So plein air painting is right the opposite of that. You're capturing that moment on that particular day
and you're using a big brush, broad strokes, trying to know the clouds, just to get the basic composition of what was going on at that moment. I love that. I'm in my head, not thinking about the bills, my mom's dementia, my dad's breathing, the garden, oh my gosh, we gotta water, I need groceries. I don't think about any of that. I'm in that moment, looking at the clouds, looking at the green, how's the sun hitting that, where's the long shadows, and it's addictive. So I love the balance of both. You could go big and then you could go small. It's how I stay my normal, I guess. So I'm not normal, but thank you.
Recognize Annette Weeks Otts and Janice Suggs Dyson, because both of those are doing what they did best in heaven, if there's any pottery up there. So we don't know. But both of them were friends, and they would be so proud that we're gathered here. A sack lunch. So you can get your sack lunch, you get whatever you want to drink. We got pink lemonade, sugar-free, regular lemonade, sugar-free, water, and I think there's some Coca-Colas and other stuff there. But does anybody else, any of you got anything you want to mention before we, okay? If they had a land patent, but if they didn't have a land patent, and like the Kennedys didn't, he didn't have a land patent here, and I thought of somebody else and I forgot now. But anyway, if we get a little newsletter started, we can update things that we find out.
And Jack pitched for us. I called. Jack had pulled that pottery up, and his arms were so strong, he would throw a curved ball. It looked like it's going across a plate and it'd go outside. Or he would throw another one that looked like it was outside and come in as a strike. We didn't have to score any runs. We won because the other people weren't going to score any at all. And the other thing in the early life was the old hill there that bring the pottery out and put it out there for sale. Then the other pottery that came out of the shop, it was put out there to dry during the sunshine. And all of us boys would be up in the hill playing, barefooted, no shirts. Sweet gum trees would ride them out the top, and looked like it's coming up a cloud. Miss Brown would holler, "Jack!" "Jack!" We didn't even hear her. Or we made out like we didn't hear her. She would finally say, "Jack Ole!" We knew it was time to go then, because she done got riled up. We had to go down there and get all that pottery and get it back inside the jug shop before rain come on it. And we had a good life. Lived next door. And Daddy's old mule, Toby, is the one that did do the ground the pottery up, or clay up. But like I say, it was a good life. Then none of us have nothing, but we didn't know we didn't have anything. And it was so good growing up with that family and all the other families here in the community. Jerry and Jack and others have passed away, and we miss all of them. And just fortunate that we've been left here. And I think he's left us here to do something. He's left me here to do something. I just hope I ain't done it yet.